Still, the East End is a very important problem, remarked Mr. Thomas with grave shake of the head. Quite so, answered the young lord. It is the problem of slavery, and we try and solve it by amusing the slaves. The politician looked at him keenly. What change do you propose, then? He asked. Lord Henry laughed. I don't desire to change anything in England except the weather, he answered. I am quite content with philosophic contemplation. But as the 19th century has gone bankrupt through an over-expenditure of sympathy, I would suggest that we should appeal to science to put us straight. The advantage of the emotions is that they lead us astray, and the advantage of science is that it is not emotional. But we have such grave responsibilities, ventured Miss Vandeleur timidly. Terribly grave, echoed Lady Agatha. Lord Henry looked over at Mr. Erskine. Humanity takes itself too seriously. It is the world's original sin. If the caveman had known how to laugh, history would have been different. You are very comforting, warbled the Duchess. I have always felt rather guilty when I came to see your dear aunt, for I take no interest at all in the East End. For the future, I shall be able to look at her in the face without a blush. A blush is very becoming, Duchess, remarked Lord Henry. Only when one is young, she answered. When an old woman like myself blushes, it is a very bad sign. Ah, Lord Henry, I wish you would tell me how to become young again. He thought for a moment. How to become young again. You know this is important. Can you remember any great error that you committed in your early days, Duchess? He asked, looking at her across the table. A great many, I fear, she cried. Then commit them over again, he said gravely. To get back one's youth, one has merely to repeat one's follies. I feel like I want to talk about this. I mean, you make stupid mistakes when you're young, and Lord Henry says that's a key element of youth, and if you want to be young again, you got to make more stupid mistakes. It's a dangerous theory, and I think we're going to get that. A delightful theory, she exclaimed. I must put it into practice. A dangerous theory, came from Sir Thomas's lips. Lady Agatha shook her head, but could not help being amused. Mr. Erskine listened. Yes, he continued, that is one of the great secrets of life. Nowadays, most people die of a sort of creeping common sense and discover when it is too late that the only things one never regrets are one's mistakes. A laugh ran round the table. Now, I think it's important to note that talking here, Lord Henry seems to be talking to the Duchess and to Lady Agatha, but the real target of his conversation is Dorian Gray, who is sitting across the table. He says here that people get old, and as they get old, they get common sense, and common sense stops them from doing anything. And to be fair, I'm 42, and I do a lot less things now than I used to do when I was young, at least less foolish things. And are we going to die of a creeping common sense? I think my dad does fewer things than I do, and so on and so forth. Up the ladder, you fall into your ways, and you know how things are going to turn out, and you don't want to put yourself in situations that you're not going to enjoy, and so maybe there's some truth here. However, the only things one never regrets are one's mistakes. That's a paradox. The things we all regret are our mistakes. And just to say that and never defend it. He said early in chapter 1, it's only the intellectually lost who ever argue. So he makes these wild claims, and if you're not really thinking, you just accept them. And that's clearly what's going on with Dorian across the table, as you'll see. But anyway, a laugh ran around the table. He played with the idea and grew willful, tossed it into the air and transformed it, let it escape and recaptured it, made it iridescent with fancy and winged it with paradox. The praise of folly, as he went on, soared into a philosophy, and philosophy herself became young, and catching the mad music of pleasure, wearing, one might fancy, her wine-stained robe and wreath of ivy, danced like a bacchanat, that would be somebody at a bacchanalia or a Bacchus festival in Rome, over the hills of life, and mocked the slow Silenus for being sober. Lots of allusions to Greek mythology again. Facts fled before her like frightened forest things. Her white feet trod the huge press at which the wise Omar sits, till the seething grape juice rose round her bare limbs in waves of purple bubbles, or clawed in red foam over the vat's black dripping, slopping sides. It was an extraordinary improvisation. He felt that the eyes of Dorian Gray were fixed on him, and the consciousness that among his audience there was one whose temperament he wished to fascinate, seemed to give his wit keenness, and to lend color to his imagination. He was brilliant, fantastic, irresponsible. He charmed his listeners out of themselves, and they followed his pipe laughing. Pied Piper illusion. Dorian Gray never took his gaze off him, but sat like one under a spell, smiles chasing each other over his lips, and wonder growing grave in his darkening eyes. At last, liveried in the costume of the age, reality entered the room in the shape of a servant, to tell the Duchess that her carriage was waiting. She wrung her hands in mock despair. "How annoying!" she cried. "I must go. I have to call for my husband at the club, to take him to some absurd meeting at Willis's rooms, where he is going to be in the chair. If I am late, he is sure to be furious, and I couldn't have a scene in this bonnet. It is far too fragile. A harsh word would ruin it. No, I must go, dear Agatha. Goodbye. Lord Henry, you are quite delightful, and dreadfully demoralizing. I am sure I don't know what to say about your views. You must come and dine with us some night. Tuesday? Are you disengaged for Tuesday?" "For you I would throw over anybody, Duchess," said Lord Henry with a bow. "Ah, that is very nice and very wrong of you," she cried. "So mind you come." And she swept out of the room, followed by Lady Agatha and the other ladies. When Lord Henry had sat down again, Mr. Erskine moved round, and taking a chair close to him, placed his hand upon his arm. "You talk books away," he said. "Why don't you write one?" "I'm too fond of reading books to care to write them, Mr. Erskine. I should like to write a novel, certainly, a novel that would be as lovely as a Persian carpet and as unreal, but there is no literary public in England for anything except newspapers, primers, and encyclopedias. Of all people in the world, the English have the least sense of the beauty of literature." "I fear you are right," answered Mr. Erskine. "I myself used to have literary ambitions, but I gave them up long ago. And now, my dear young friend, if you will allow me to call you so, may I ask if you really meant all that you said to us at lunch?" "I quite forgot what I said," smiled Lord Henry. "Was it all very bad?" "Very bad indeed. In fact, I consider you extremely dangerous. And if anything happens to our good Duchess, we shall all look to you as being primarily responsible. But I should like to talk to you about life. The generation into which I was born is tedious. Some day, when you are tired of London, come down to Treadley, and expound to me your philosophy of pleasure over some admirable Burgundy I am fortunate enough to possess. I shall be charmed. A visit to Treadley would be a great privilege. It has a perfect host and a perfect library." "You will complete it," answered the old gentleman with a courteous bow. "And now I must bid good-bye to your excellent aunt. I am due at the Athenaeum. It is the hour when we sleep there." "All of you, Mr. Erskine?" 40 of us in 40 armchairs. We are practicing for an English Academy of Letters." Lord Henry laughed and rose. "I'm going to the park," he cried. As he was passing out the door, Dorian Gray touched him on the arm. "Let me come with you," he murmured. "But I thought you had promised Basil Hallward to go and see him," answered Lord Henry. "I would sooner come with you. Yes, I feel I must come with you. Do let me. And will you promise to talk to me all the time? No one talks as wonderfully as you do." "Ha! I have talked quite enough for today," said Lord Henry, smiling. "All I want now is to look at life. You may come and look at it with me, if you care to." And that's the end of chapter 3, which, interestingly, after Lord Henry propounds his theory on remaining youthful or regaining your youth by making moral errors, ends with Dorian throwing over Basil, not going to visit Basil, and going with Lord Henry to the park. Another garden? Yeah, so that's chapter 3. That's today's lesson. I will close it off, and we'll talk a little bit about what happened in chapter 3 and why it's important next time. Chapter 3 was pretty heavy on the social